Right folks, welcome to the fourth Changing Places video, which very much follows on from number 3. And if you, I should have put start from the slide, not from the beginning. Silly mistake. So you can see what video number 3 would have covered, because it's all these slides that I'm whizzing through now. So that's Changing Places 3. What that follows on to is the fact that all of those changes in the jobs that people do can be turned into graphs, because we tend to do that in geography, don't we? We tend to turn it into graphs and figures, and we like to use data. And you can see here, if we look at the blue bars, that sort of less developed countries, you would expect to have a really large primary sector and much smaller secondary and tertiary sectors. You would expect countries going through their transition, going through their industrial phase, to have a slightly smaller primary, bigger secondary, slightly bigger tertiary. And you would expect countries like the UK to have a tiny primary sector because of all the reasons that we mentioned in video number 3. The secondary sector has declined again, so it does this kind of increase and then decrease again. And then our tertiary sector is massive. If we apply that to the UK, we can see changes. Or if we apply it to here, the primary sector in pink, pink for primary, gets smaller and smaller. The secondary does this increase and decrease, and the tertiary sector gets bigger and bigger. Now, of course, that means there's going to be a model, and it's a really important model, partly because I go on about it all the time, and partly because it's just really helpful. And here it is, the Clark-Fisher model. It's just a line graph. It's very simple, but it's really, really brilliant. Now, you should have a copy of this in your module booklet, but I would recommend that you try to learn to draw it, label it, annotate it, all of those things, because I think it will really, really help you. Just to prove to you, and actually if you draw it out, or maybe even in your module booklet, I would make these lines different colours so they really stand out from each other. So if you use the module booklet, you could go over in highlighter, and if you draw it out from scratch yourself, you could use different colours. And it just tells you exactly what we've said. The primary sector gets smaller and smaller and smaller. The secondary sector increases and then decreases again. The tertiary sector just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then the quaternary sector sneaks in at the end. And we'll talk about this right at the end of the module. Quick reminder, the quaternary sector is a branch of the tertiary, so it is part of the service sector, but we differentiate it because it's the very clever services. It's also known as the knowledge economy, and it's a very special part that you will only get in more developed countries once you have standards of education that are good enough for this to kind of flourish. Okay, so that's the Clark-Fisher model. Learn it as best you can. As I said, try to make the lines stand out from each other, either using highlighters or drawing it yourself. Now, there are some little case studies. These do not need to be big and detailed, but you do need some case studies for each stage. Malawi, China, South Korea, UK. Malawi is here. China is here, South Korea is kind of here, and the UK's here. So they are case studies for different stages of the Clark-Fisher model. They are in your module booklet, and you only need the key points. All right, so these are sort of a revision card each, at most, to be honest, one side of a revision card each. If you were doing these on A4 paper, you could definitely fit them all on one side of paper, just to give you an idea. But one thing I would just recommend is, I would imagine that the vast majority of you are pretty happy with what the UK's like and things. And actually, the YouTube channel I'm about to recommend to you doesn't have a video on the UK, so apologies. But if you don't really know much about these countries, please can I recommend to you, there we are. Oh, I've opened it loads of times now. We have to get past the advert, obviously.
We can help. Remember how in the Ghana episode?
Okay, so this gentleman is Paul Barboa, and he has a YouTube channel called Geography Now that you are looking at, and he has taken it upon himself to create a roughly 10-minute video about every single country in the world, and it goes through everything that you need to know, really, the highlights. He's a little bit like Marmite. Some people think he's brilliant and some people can't really stand him. But I do genuinely believe that if you are doing a case study of a country that you just don't really know anything about, I do think it will be worth checking out his videos. So I have hyperlinked the Malawi, China and South Korea videos. If you're like, do you know what, I don't even know what continent Malawi's in, I've never heard of it. Probably a good idea to get a little bit of context. Okay, so that's those. And obviously I'm not setting these as homework because I might not even teach you. But these would be my sort of recommended tasks to you, that you draw a version of Clark Fisher out and annotate it. So if I am your geography teacher, I will have set this as a task for you to do either in class or during remote learning. But if I don't teach you, I still think that's a really good idea. And the description and explanation comes from video number 3. So you might need to go back to that and kind of watch that to remind you. And then obviously summarise the points of the case studies. But the moral of the story is that this is really important to changing places and worth putting some time and effort into learning, ladies and gents. So there we are, nice short video, but I do need to mention these. Triangular graphs are quite weird and quite unusual, but they are used to represent the jobs that people do in a country. Because you can divide the jobs that people do into primary, secondary, tertiary, it lends itself to 3 axes, to a triangular graph. Now, I actually explain these in a different YouTube video that is called, very catchily, Column 2 Recorded Lesson. So I'm not going to repeat myself, but to find out about triangular graphs, if you find that video, Column 2 Recorded Lesson, I do go through and explain how to read the data from these and how to plot on them. But if I don't make a huge amount of sense, which does happen, I appreciate you can't copy and paste this from a video, but if you make a note of that web address, in fact, I'll tell you what, let's open it and then you can see what it looks like. So if you find this explanation, this is another geography teacher who explains how to use triangular graphs, and it might be that his explanation helps you better than mine does, which does sometimes happen, and that's the one that you're looking for. All right, so you've got 2 choices to revise triangular graphs. You've got my video, Column 2 Recorded Lesson, or you've got that other geography teacher's one. Okay, thanks folks.